Welcome, everybody, to the Master Plan Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Bendersky. I am joined by the esteemed, the venerable, the legendary Javier Vasquez. You can and you should follow Javi on Instagram at JV Jiu-Jitsu and at The Real Javier Vasquez. He is on Twitter at Javier Showtime. On Vimeo, you can find the JVOS system, his profile, JV Jiu-Jitsu. He will be at CSW in Fullerton with the venerable Eric Paulson on August 18th. That is a Friday. He will be teaching during the CSW seminar August 18th through 20th. On August 26th at the JV Jiu-Jitsu Academy, there is a women's self-defense class that Javi is running in conjunction with a local gym. If you are interested, please DM Javi on Twitter. Folks, I started with Javi or Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll post his phone number at the end. No, folks, I started with Javi in January 2013. I was a neophyte jiu-jitsu student. I didn't know my elbow from my other elbow, and I was lucky enough, I was privileged enough to find Javier Vasquez in Rancho Cucamonga and try a free class. And I had a little bit of experience from a local jiu-jitsu gym that was not Javi's Academy. But for the last decade, I have been lucky enough to call Javi my instructor. And that was my jiu-jitsu origin story. And luckily, I've stayed basically with just one academy and one instructor. And it's certainly a pleasure and an honor to be able to do that. Javi, how did you get into jiu-jitsu? What was your origin story?
In 1996, I came across jiu-jitsu, or I came across the UFC 4 at a local, I guess, Korean like video store when those things were a thing. And I watched the UFC and I said, I want to learn that. There was a grappling art. I was coming from college wrestling. I wanted to keep grappling. I really liked grappling and wrestling, but I didn't want to have to do it competitively. Being in wrestling shape and being a competitive wrestler, it's a hard lifestyle. It's hard on the body. But I did want to keep wrestling. Wrestling was just something that came fairly naturally to me, and I enjoyed it. And I wanted to be able to continue wrestling, or at least some form of wrestling, without having to be competing at a high level, forever. It's hard on the body. So at the end of my final wrestling season, my wrestling coach and I came across Rodrigo Medeiros in Whittier, California, and we started training under the Carlson Gracie team in 1997. And my story of jiu-jitsu is, I felt that it was quite difficult to learn. I mean, I kind of was able to put things together because I was, a college wrestler and I had some experience, but the process of learning jiu-jitsu, I thought was, and it takes time. Back in the day, to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu, it would take about at least, 10, 12, 15 years to achieve it. And I always wondered, why did it take so long? And I ended up getting my black belt in 5.5 years, but, I figured, oh, well, it's because, I had previous experience. I was a college wrestler and all that. Then when I started to really kind of figure out how I learned jiu-jitsu, I started to realize, some of the problems. And I one of the things that I wanted to do, and the reason why why we started this podcast, and the reason why, we're telling these stories, is because I felt that there was an inherent problem with learning jiu-jitsu and why it took so long to learn jiu-jitsu. So when I started training jiu-jitsu, and I think that my experience is not uncommon with most students, I learned techniques in no particular order. I had to figure out which techniques work best for my style, my body type. I started to group techniques into categories, sweeps and arm locks and things of that nature, submissions. I had to figure out what to develop in my style. Like, there was no real route to improvement. That was kind of always put on your shoulder. had to put together a complete game, had to come up with some sort of a strategy, and then ultimately hope for the best. And I competed a lot and I won a lot. But again, I was winning using a wrestling mindset, to get on top, to pass guard, to score points, to hang on when I needed to. And really what I started to realize was that there was a difference between practicing jiu-jitsu and learning jiu-jitsu and why I got jiu-jitsu into the first place. So they kind of weren't in line. And the reason I started jiu-jitsu in the first place, and the reason why I was so, into the UFC and I wanted to learn, was because I wanted to learn how to defend myself, and I wanted to use grappling as a defensive base to fighting, I guess you can say, or self-defense, really more than fighting at the time. But they didn't really match. Like competition jiu-jitsu, which is what most academies teach, was very different than jiu-jitsu for fighting. So my goal was always jiu-jitsu for fighting and self-defense. And, even though I was practicing jiu-jitsu and doing arm locks and chokes and stuff, I think that it was a very different mindset. Ultimately, now I know that it was a very different mindset as to what I was learning and what I really wanted to learn. So I think most jiu-jitsu schools have this issue, where I think a lot of people come into these schools wanting to learn one thing, and they think that that's what they're learning, when in reality they're learning, how to compete and how to do a sport. And the biggest difference between sport jiu-jitsu and MMA or fighting or self-defense is the mindset and how you're thinking about what you're doing, what you're thinking about, why you're doing it, and ultimately the goals that you're trying to achieve while you're doing jiu-jitsu. For me, my goals were very simple. My goals were to not take damage, not to, when you take damage, it makes you tired. When people are hitting you and stuff, it makes you tired. It makes you very reactive. And then plus the physical damage, the bruising, all these things start making you very tired. So ultimately I started, training to fight very early on. Within a year or so, I was already competing in at the time it was called pancrase, which is open hand, basically slap fighting. But I definitely started to realize that the jiu-jitsu I was learning was not very coordinated or refined for fighting. So, I watched the old UFCs and I watched how Royce Gracie defended punches, and I kind of started to mimic that.
How early did you realize that as you transition from wrestling, now you're training jiu-jitsu, now you're taking pancrase fights? At what point, did you, by the time where you were slap fighting and pancrase fights, did you realize that you need to adjust things? Was it then, was it a little bit later, or did you get it really early on? The sense that something needs to be adjusted on your end.
It was pretty early on, I think. I saw some benefits to doing what we were doing, obviously, because every time I would compete, I would win. But as far as modifying things for fighting, I think I figured that out pretty early on. And obviously, as time went on, the rules changed, right? So in MMA or NHB, the rules were very different. Nowadays, MMA, the rules are very, very different. There's stand-ups, there's referee, breaking guys and splitting them apart. Where back in the day, that wasn't really the case. It was very much, you take a guy down, they're stuck there the whole round, and they had to figure out how to get out. Same thing, when you're on your back and you had a little bit more time to, if you got taken down, you can work your guard, you can be a little bit more patient. And it was a little bit more kind of realistic in a sense, where the activity wasn't pushed as much as it is now.
And you only had one fight per night.
And you're only fighting one time.
Now you're only fighting once per night.
Now we're only fighting one time a night. My first tournament was 3 fights. My second competition was 2 fights. So, I had 5 fights in 2 events. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a very different mindset. It's a very, you got to pace yourself differently. You got to preserve your body differently. So it was almost like a wrestling tournament with, with punches and slaps, right?
I'm gonna take a very short sidetrack, but I'm very interested. You are uniquely positioned and you have experience in both styles and going deep into the new era of MMA. Your career spans like well into 2012. So would you like to see it come back? Multi-fight tournaments? Do you think it's for the best that it's gone? Or is there something novel and interesting about many fights in a
I
day?
think it's very interesting to see a guy fight 3 times in one night. See how it's a different level of strategy when you're fighting 3 times in one night than if you're fighting, one time, right? You're just basically trying to peak for one 15 or 25-minute fight. It's very different. To be able to recover and come back again, warm, let your body cool down and warm back up. That in and of itself is quite difficult and challenging in its own right. Being able, that's why I fought the way I fought, because not taking damage is a big deal when you're fighting 3 times a night. You can't fight the way some of these guys fight nowadays and fight 3 times. It just doesn't make any sense. But again, that was part of my initial strategy always, was to not take damage and not get hit, and to be able to fight effectively and efficiently enough to where, you're not getting tired, things of that nature.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Watching a fighter's journey through those tournaments. We have access to videos now, so we can pull up an old event from the early '90s, and as you go through the tournament, inevitably there are guys that I haven't heard of, because this was all years ago now. But you become very attached. It's a similar things happen in grappling tournaments as you watch a bracket, your own bracket or maybe a friend's bracket, and all of a sudden there's a couple of characters in this bracket that you're very interested in now, that you
Mm-hmm.
sort of, and you develop this I don't know, a fan of it. You're very interested in watching their journey through it, and all of a sudden this
Mm-hmm.
dark horse comes through and nobody thought this kid would win, and all of a sudden, and
The story, the
exactly,
story.
um and
You're
it all
following the
happens within one
characters in
night.
the story, right? You're
Yeah.
following the characters in the story. So yeah, tournaments were very intriguing. Um, so yeah, I mean, back in the day, it was just different, right? So my mindset coming into this was not to win gold medals. I mean, yes, I won plenty of gold medals. That wasn't the goal. I mean, that to me, that was a means to an end. I mean, ultimately, I got into fighting very early on in my training, and I had a lot of success early on. So, you know, my goals were different. My goals were different. My goals were to be a well-rounded martial artist. So, um, I feel that the way I learned jiu-jitsu put a lot of responsibility on the individual student. I think that teaching jiu-jitsu was not really something that there was a plan. There was no real plan. I call it a desired result. There was no desired result built in or baked into the cake. I think that that's what separates me and what I do from everybody else, is that I reverse engineered teaching. I have my desired results. I have the things that I want to achieve, and then I design into the program a built-in way to achieve these desired results. I kind of built it backwards, right? I had
Mm-hmm.
goals in mind as to what I wanted my students to learn, and then I figured out how to teach them those goals.
That
So I
makes a lot
think
of
that
sense.
that desired result is something that is missing, and the result can't just be winning tournaments, because that was never my goal. My goal was to be able to defend myself and to build the most effective martial art for fighting and self-defense. That was kind of my goal. That's always been my goal. And when you watch the way I fought, that was always kind of the way I fought. I fought in a particular way that resulted, that gave me desired results: not taking damage, getting out of there as quickly as possible, not giving unnecessary damage to the opponent. I would strike to position and submit rather than to do damage. I never fought with emotion. These are kind of inherent things that were baked into the cake of how I fought.
The evidence is
So
there, I think, too, as well, in terms of the results that you saw. I think you don't have to toot your own horn. I'll do it for you. There's a very, very small club of fighters that have over 20 fights professionally that fought in the UFC, that have wins in the UFC, in the WEC, and were never stopped. Never submitted, never TKO, never KO'd. And you happen to belong to that club. It's a very small list. And so I think that's direct evidence of what you're speaking to. Like, I don't recall in watching any of your fights you taking a big cut, for instance.
no, I had little scratches here and there, but nothing. I never got cut, never got stitched, never got knocked out, never got dropped, never nothing, right? So, you can say, well, it was luck. Well, I do believe that there is an element of luck in fighting. There's no question, but there's also design as well. I fought a particular way to achieve a particular result. So, I believe that the way jiu-jitsu is taught today has the desired result is not something that's implemented. People just teach, and it puts a lot of responsibility on the student to improve. The system itself of teaching and learning is not designed so much to make you improve. It's designed to teach you moves. It's designed to help you win tournaments. That's not the goal. My desired results for the way I teach are very simple. Number one, rapid skill development. I want people to get good as fast as possible. How good and how fast do the students get? Well, from my experience in teaching this system for basically, my whole life, this is kind of the way I've always kind of structured my teaching, was rapid skill development. Get good fast, right? That's kind of a primary goal. Then the question becomes, well, how do I do that? Well, that's what's baked into the cake. Another desired result is universal comfort, being able to be comfortable in any position and being able to defend yourself from any position. Of course, baked into the cake is a high level of effectiveness, high levels of efficiency. And really, what is baked into the cake, it's kind of invisibly baked, I guess you can say, is punch defense mindset throughout. I fight in a particular way from every position. I tell you to do things in a particular way where you're not going to get hit. And that's where I think a lot of jiu-jitsu schools don't really implement that. They just kind of teach you moves, but then they expose you to taking a beating. And I think that is the biggest difference in my jiu-jitsu, is the way I'm teaching you, it's baked into where if we're going to roll with strikes or without strikes, it doesn't really matter. I'm not teaching you two different ways to roll. I am teaching you one way to roll, which kind of hits all of these key points. Well, you can say, well, it's not optimized for competition. Well, I'm going to say this, that there are certain universal truths in grappling and in fighting, and I follow the universal truths. So, okay, well, maybe it's not the absolute, best unbelievable stuff for winning tournaments. I think it's right up there with the best. And if you get into a fight, you're still not going to get hit.
You don't have to change what you're doing.
That's something that I really focused on, is that if you want to say, well, we learned 10,000 moves and you're only showing us, 5,000 moves, we're learning double the moves. I'm like, and my goal and my response to that is, those 5,000 moves aren't going to help you in a real fight. I'm teaching you the moves that are going to be universally applicable. Gi, no gi, punches, no punches. And that is, trimming the fat, teaching a very lean martial art, which is highly effective, highly efficient. You'll get good fast. And how fast will you get? I say about every 3 to 4 months, about every cycle of the system, you will see dramatic improvements in your skill set and mindset. It takes about 3 months. I started to document, like, okay, when do I look at my guys? When do I watch my guys sparring? And I say to myself, the improvement is obvious. And the obvious improvement in the skill set is about between a 3 and a 4 month window of time. Know for a fact that if you're training with me consistently, between every 3 to 4 months, you will see marked improvement in the skill set. And that's all baked into the cake.
And I can attest that, you know, the white belts are tough at your school. They're very tough. They're hard to tap, especially if they've been around for 2 or 3 of those cycles and have been attending regularly. You know, like I call myself a time served purple belt. I've been training for over 10 years. I'm a purple. Like I don't make any illusions about what my skills or abilities are. But as a purple belt, you think, okay, this is a white belt. They've been doing it for less than a year. I should be able to get this kid. No, not always. But in fact, it's usually pretty tough. Like the first thing that you know, there's such a comfort that's developed in bad positions early, uh among a lot of other things, that like hard to tap, hard to hit, um you know, is instilled really, really early. uh some things like walking into your gym is January 2013, and I think it was the second or third week that I was around that you like officially announced your retirement. So you were still coming out of the, you know, hyper competitive, or at least, you know, like you were having to focus on a hyper effective type of jujitsu for your own fights. That was sort of, it was, I was very near to the time. It was right after your Joe Stevenson fight, basically, that I showed up. And a couple of things were that still stand out to me, that I still remember. Is the first thing is that for every class that you were teaching, you would teach the moves and then you would go straight to your laptop and you were writing. So you would do the instruction and people were drilling and you were coordinating drilling and you were documenting everything. And this lasted for years.
Yes.
This lasted for 3, 4, 5 years. That was the cycles. Hobby is teaching and then hobby is documenting. And the second thing that I remember, like, you did not let me, you had things split between fundamentals and advanced class, and you did not let me roll. And you did not let me go to the advanced class for good reason. I did not belong there. But I would sit and I would watch, and I did not understand, because this was so different from any other jujitsu instruction that I was seeing online, that I had seen from the other schools that I had attended before I found your academy. And it seemed like you were teaching a chain of 5 moves at once instead of, you know, one kimura, one sweep. It seemed like you were teaching an entire progression and series, and like conceptually the way you're breaking things down. I had no reference point for it. But within, you know, as you said, I think, as you mentioned, a season, maybe 3, 4 months, things started to click together. I think you mandated that I needed like 2 stripes before you would let me go to the advanced class. And then I think through just sheer will of force and showing up and just sitting and watching you let me do it at like 1 stripe, or something like that. Like I just kept showing up until you let me in, and then I just started getting pounded out, absolutely pounded out by everybody. But um I realized, like, there was a progression of techniques that all of a sudden, you know, not all of a sudden, but seemingly all of a sudden, you have an entire flow, you have an entire sequence, rather than you're in this static position, execute this one move. And that hit me very early. And I realized that, like, probably maybe not very early, but maybe a year and a half in, it's like, oh my gosh, we're learning so much more than just one move at a time through every. Can you talk about how you develop that? How do you think about things? Because inevitably during your instruction, uh, there's 5 or 6 or 7 things to take away from it that apply to all different areas. At least
Yeah,
that's me.
you know, I've altered. I've tried. You know, I think that's part of my progression as an instructor. Is I did try different things. Right, I was always experimenting to see what works best, and I felt that at that time that not letting students spar was the right thing to do to protect the student, to preserve the health and mindset of the students, so that students don't get discouraged. I always group things together. That's something that came from wrestling. I always group techniques together so things kind of flow together in a sequence. It always made sense to me to do it that way. I never understood why jujitsu people would teach the way they did. And I think that maybe it was a lack of foresight, right? Like, and again, you know, jujitsu development and teaching jujitsu and teaching the art has evolved over time. And I've always tried to be on the cutting edge of being ahead of everybody else as to what I'm doing. I always group things together. I got that from wrestling. Things in wrestling were always taught in sequences. The guy does this, the guy does that, the guy does this, the guy does that. You kind of work progression. So I always did that. What I've done more recently is categorizing techniques based on importance and based on effectiveness. So I've narrowed it down to teaching things based on what I call the central path, which is doing what works best first. Let's do that first from every position. Each position that I teach is a perspective. There's side mount top, side mount bottom. Those are two independent perspectives, and those are two independent central paths. So they're unique from each other. So what I'm doing from the top as a central path is differently than what I'm doing from the bottom, obviously, because they're two different perspectives with two different sets of goals. So this is something that I've been developing. Really, over the past several years, over the past 7 or so years, 6 or 7 years, I've really been understanding and dissecting what I do, and more importantly, why I do it. Well, why do I do the things I do? Because they work the best. They work the best first. That's kind of what I started to teach first. What works first? What works best first? Now, when you do that first, what's going to happen is that the opponent's going to behave in a particular way. You're going to generate a particular type of behavior. And when they react from that particular behavior, then you have your secondary and supplemental options. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a timeline of events now. And this is something that's been developed. I never really thought of it that way. But ultimately, that is the way that my style has developed. And it's taken me, when you talk about the years that I was documenting and writing, I mean, I wrote 16 books and 2,500 pages based on all of the positions. And I wrote this as if I was teaching this to my kids, step by step, inch by inch, move by move, lesson by lesson. Each lesson is a progressive flow. So I teach one thing and we progress through. So what I was doing was I was taking these simulations and then clipping them into independent lessons. Since then, I've recognized that I might have taught a particular move third in a sequence or fourth in a sequence. And then what I've done now is I've moved that up to the front. And I say, well, this is what works best first all the time. So I've really kind of, because I was able to document everything and I was able to kind of take a 30,000 view look at what I was doing, it made it easier for me to kind of rejigger things in a way which made a little bit more sense. So I break things down into my academy when I teach lessons. And like I said, my academy is very different because I have a desired result in mind. And the desired result, the academy machine, I call this, the academy is run as if it was a machine. There are 3 elements of this machine. So rather than the student having to, come up with their own style and come and figure and learn moves randomly and categorize all the moves, instead of the student having to do all this work, which doesn't make any sense because the student doesn't know. Even if you have a background, you're still kind of blindly figuring things out on your own. I wanted the student to relinquish that amount of responsibility into the instructor and, more importantly, into the system itself. So the system itself, baked into the system are 3 key primary, I guess you can say, ingredients. And the 3 ingredients are very simple. The first is the JVOS mindset, is how we think of the position, how we think of the moves, how we think of mechanics, how strategy, philosophy, fatigue generation, behavior generation, all of these things that are within the JVOS is the primary goal. The mindset, how you're thinking of the problem, is the main and primary objective. That's what we're starting with. Secondarily, we're focusing on positionally based chapters. So each individual chapter is a positional perspective, top and bottom, offense and defense, depending on what we're discussing. And then the final ingredient is the central path strategy. which means each position has a best way or a most consistent way to function from. So I teach you that first. Once you're in the machine and you understand the mindset, you understand the positionally based chapters, what the starting points are. That's what the perspectives are. That's what the chapters are. What is my starting point? There has to be some sort of a starting point. And then the central path strategy. Now, the next layer is what I call configuration theory. So within each positional based chapter, there are particular configurations that your body's in, which are more important than others, which are more beneficial than others, which is something that I've really started to notice through configurational shift. Adjusting your arm from one position to another makes all the difference within this positional perspective. So again, we're narrowing down exactly what we're doing in a very kind of scientific way so that you're getting the best results as quickly as possible. You're gaining ground as quickly as possible. And what I've gotten from a lot of my students is that when they go to roll with other people from other school, open mats, competitions, things of that nature, they're like, they just don't know. They don't understand. Because the way I look at it is most academies teach the leaves of the tree. So it's your job to kind of collect the leaves, group the leaves into piles, and then figure out what to do with them. I don't do that. And that's the way initially everybody taught. And that's where I was saying, you got to figure out what moves work best first. You got to figure out, the strategy. You got to figure out all of these things because you're collecting at the leaves. You're collecting the end result. The way I'm doing it is I'm teaching you the trunk. I'm teaching you, listen, this is the base of the problem. What is the base of the problem from this particular perspective, from this particular configuration? What is the base problem? And when you understand the root of all problem, all of a sudden you focus on the skills to control and dominate the roots of the problem, which is a much simpler way to look at the problem rather than to try and learn a bunch of moves and figure out where to plug those moves into your game. Because jiu-jitsu is very dynamic. It's making decisions through motion and time. That's what jiu-jitsu is. That's how I simplify the game. We're making decisions. That's what JVOS does. It helps you make the right decisions, because you understand the root problem, you can make better decisions, and ultimately you will have a better result.
I think thinking back to my induction into the system, and thinking about keeping it simple, and some of the methods that I remember you employing that I think you still employ, and it, what is our goal here? Don't get hit. What is our goal here? Don't get submitted. Well, that's a very easy thing for a new student or someone with less experience. All I have to do is not lose, which is, hey, where have we heard that before?
Yeah.
But it makes it simple.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when you understand configuration theory and you understand where you just don't want to end up, you start to create a defensive perimeter or an offensive perimeter. If I can just get to this spot here, things go well from there forward. So I'm just saying, how many different ways can we get to that place? Because once I get to a particular spot, I know that everything beyond that is gravy. So then how do I get to that particular spot? Now, I've been doing this a long time. I've ran the simulation tens of thousands of times. I know what particular configurations are the ones that are most beneficial and the ones that are most dangerous. So when you look at things through configuration theory, again, we're trying to simplify the process of knowing when you're in danger and when you're not, and when you're getting to the right spot and fighting to the right spot and away from the bad spots. And it simplifies the game because YouTube has a million moves. You can learn moves everywhere, but how do those moves apply into a system, into your own? Because independent moves don't work. You might be able to catch a guy here and there with independent moves, but one of the things that I look for is effectiveness, consistency, and effectiveness. Being able to do the same thing over and over and over and continuously gain success. I was at that really good black belts. You watch them do the same thing over and over, and nobody can stop. There's a high level of effectiveness and a high level of efficiency in what they're doing. I care about that. I don't care about doing 10,000 things. I care about doing the thing that works the best all the time. Now, I'm not saying that once you understand the basic system, you can't add moves and then you go, oh, I learned this move. Oh, I can plug this right into this particular situation. Yeah, great. As a secondary or supplemental way as a supplemental option. But the central path remains a central path. That's never going to change because it's what works the best first. There's nothing that works better than the central path, in my opinion. And I said, and I challenge people to test the central path. I'm not saying you can't stop the central path, but what I am saying is that the way you're going to stop the central path is by one of the already predicted generated behaviors. And because the way you stop the central path is by one of these generated behaviors, I already have the solution to those counters. So what I'm doing is I'm building a timeline of events in the defensive or offensive perimeter to where I'm generating what's happening because I am forcing you to fight the battles that are most important. I call these crucial battles. So the fact that I make you fight, the battles are the battles. The crucial battles are the crucial battles. If you don't know what those battles are, and I fought those battles over and over and over again and had high levels of success, I am forcing you to fight battles that I know I'm going to win 80+% of the time. And that's where the effectiveness comes in. I am forcing you to fight battles that I will win 80+% of the time. And when you're looking at jiu-jitsu through a lens of 80% victory over time, it builds a confidence of understanding and effectiveness that will result in you being able to get very good very fast.
Imagine flipping a coin and knowing what the result will be 80% of the time. Gives you a lot.
Pretty good. I'm not saying you're going to win 100, but man, you're going to win. You know, the goal is simple. The goal of the central path is very simple: to win far more than you lose. Why not start learning jiu-jitsu with that? Why not start learning jiu-jitsu from a place of knowing, hey, this is going to work 80% of the time? I think what happens with a lot of people is that they learn a move, and if the move works for them, they stick with the move. Okay, why do they stick with the move? Because the move works. A lot of times people will learn a basic move, a move that's highly effective and highly usable, and they don't have success with that move. So what happens is, oh, I don't have success. So then they kind of dismiss the move, even though they should take the time to get good at the move. Now, how much time do I take to get good at moves? Put it this way. Over the years of my training, I have dedicated years of my life to mastering particular perspectives. The back mount, I have spent well over 7 to 8 years developing. Wrestling, I've been developing that, 30 years, 20 years, however long. The mount, I spent, a solid 2.5, 3 years developing the mount. Each perspective, I said, okay, let's spend several months to several years and let's see what is available. And what you start seeing is the consistencies in the simulation. You start seeing the consistent behaviors. You start seeing the consistent battles that you win. You start seeing how the opponent is defeating you. How are they beating me? What configuration am I losing from most consistent? And you avoid those configurations and you fight away from those configurations. I have put that time in, so I'm giving you a shortcut. I am saving you tens of thousands of hours of research because I've already done the research. You just have to do one thing, which is trust in what I'm doing and to know that I have already been down that road. And if I'm telling you, hey, this is what has to happen in order for you to be successful, for you to trust the fact that I've already done that, and to trust that although it will be uncomfortable to be developing these skills initially, over time, the comfort will come. Over time, the effectiveness will come. Over time, the efficiency will come. And over time, the success will come.
Yeah, I think the proof in the pudding that I've seen, or some of the evidence, is that the higher belt, the people that have made it to black belt under you, and then some of the upper belts that you have now, how similar, and they're all different people with different personality types, and they're all different human beings, but there is the same sense of, I'm so screwed no matter what position I'm in when I'm rolling with these people. That is the same sense that I have when I roll with you, in that there is a sense of calm, familiarity, and
Comfort, universal
complete
comfort.
comfort, no matter where I am. And I know that I can be mounted with a wrist pinned and a knee over the other arm, and this close to a submission, knowing like I'm nowhere near it. In that, the efficiency of their movements, like there's always, you know, when they decide that it's time to change the perspective, the perspective is going to be changed. It's almost, the game becomes and at my level, I try to do this with people, I don't know, with people with less experience than me. You give them the opportunity to show you a look, to give you something that's new, because what happens is you kind of get pretty familiar with side control and the SES system and 2-on-1 advantage and absolute advantages everywhere, and that like you kind of have a sense of, I'm really comfy here. They might think that they're somewhere, but I'm super okay here. And it's terrifying once you realize that they're not scared at all, even though you are in some dominant position. It becomes terrifying because you think, oh God, I've thrown everything at them. Now I'm tired. They're not tired. They haven't done anything. Oh, they're waking up now. Oh, and it's terrifying. Like now I'm out of energy and thrown everything at them, and now they're starting up. And the similarity between it's not that, not that it's this, they're clones of each other, or it's not that. It's that it's a consistent sense of, they're so comfortable, and you can tell that when they decide that your time is up, your time is up. And I wonder, like, being able to consistently produce that result in people as they progress in your system, I think it's incredible evidence of the effectiveness of what, let alone the fact that it's so incredibly hard once a white belt has been with you for, 2 of those seasons, those 3 or 4 month seasons, and they've been through a couple of those. Really tough, really, really tough. And it's very interesting.
I think I'm going to tell you that I think the biggest problem in the way that most people practice jiu-jitsu, and you can see it as a problem, or you can see it as an element, is people's understanding of time. Time is what really shifts the focus and shifts your energy output and shifts your behavior, because time will make you behave in very different ways. And what I mean by time is, the second you start rolling with a timer, and then you start adding points, for example, but there's a time set, the opponent and well, the two competitors or the two people that are participating in the activity, in the sparring activity, are going to behave differently. The energy level, the energy output is always going to be higher because time is limited. So you're trying to achieve as much as you can within a set period of time, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, whatever the case may be. The shorter the time, the higher the intensity. The longer the time, the more sustainable the energy needs to be, because you don't know when you're going to run, you don't know when you're going to be able to finish. So if you go into a match, say, for example, with no time limit, you're not going to be trying to go nuts, because if you go nuts and the person just plays defense for those 4 or 5 minutes, you're going to exhaust and eventually you're going to get caught. Whereas when you're competing and it's, 6, 7, 8 minutes, you can go pretty hard, 100%. You just got to condition your body to do that. And it's, the technique is force. It's the timing is not as clean. The technique is not as clean because things are more forced. Whereas if I say to you, listen, time is not a factor. If you're in a street fight, time is not a factor. You can take your time. There is no rush to get to the wrist. Wait for them to relax and accept, and then grab their wrist. So time has become my understanding of time, and understanding how time and mindset go hand in hand. Your mindset in a particular situation changes based on how much time is on the clock. If you're losing and you have 30 seconds or a minute left, you're going to be going berserk trying to get out, rather than if time is not a factor and you're stuck, you can relax a little bit and wait for the right opportunity in order to make the movement using concepts such as red light, green light.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, and certainly thinking about self-defense, that the fact that what an embarrassing thing it would be, and it definitely happened to me, to get your ass kicked in a street fight while you're training jiu-jitsu. And it happens so often. But
people that been training jiu-jitsu forever. 1 second, I gotta plug in power here. People that have been training jiu-jitsu forever and are losing to street fighters. It's crazy.
The timing, what I have found in my experience, which is I am just about as average or below average as like, I think the thing I have going for me is my commitment and tenacity, and that I'll just like, I'll keep going. I realize that it takes me longer to learn things than the average person, and sometimes like much longer, for whatever reason. Sometimes sometimes I ask people, I'm like, just keep repeating something until you see in my face that I get it, because like you might, because sometimes it for whatever reason, but what balances that out, I think, is that because it takes me longer and I stick it through, when I decide to stick with something, I put in the reps, and in the end result is that I have a better sense for it. I think it's certainly from my background in hockey. I reached a certain level. I became decent, within my age range, and then even like being better than people older than me at my level. I'm not physically gifted. I'm rather short. I'm 5'7". Especially when I was playing, I wasn't even in particularly great shape. I was probably a little bit overweight for what I could have been. It was the fact that to keep up with the most elite, I had to do the fundamentals better, know the situation that we're in, and having had good coaches to put me in those situations so many times, as you were referencing with jiu-jitsu. I think it's a universal concept. I'm very comfortable in a one-on-one battle in a corner. It doesn't matter who you are or how big you are, even, especially as a defenseman. Like, you put me in that situation. I've been here so many times with so many different people, and that confidence, I think crossing that over from something that I was a little bit better at into jiu-jitsu, which I still feel like I have leagues and leagues and leagues of ocean to explore before I even call myself competent, is that the more, putting yourself in bad scenarios and being comfortable there, and the mindset that you develop once it's there, and I'm probably too quick to do it, but I don't mind someone passing my guard so we can get into side control where I'm very, very comfortable with escapes and defense and 2-on-1s and and I don't mind them transitioning straight into mount from there, because there's a number of things that I know I can trap that they probably haven't seen before, or there's a system of getting their hands to the ground and crawling up and getting to the whatever transition I'm looking for, but I want to get there, and like it's almost like I'm putting myself there because I want to get there, and then challenging myself with bigger guys, with better guys, and kind of putting yourself in that position. It's almost suicidal when you don't realize what's going on. But like, it's seemingly like, what are you doing? Why would you do this?
I think that competition jiu-jitsu is so limited because it teaches you to avoid vulnerable positions. Don't get your guard passed. So you never work from side mount bottom. You don't put the hours in to develop the universal comfort that you need from a position like side mount or mount, because you're taught to avoid them because, you're losing points when you get put there. So you're limiting what you're doing. And what you got to realize is that at some point in time, someone's going to pass. At some point in time, this is what I realized, even when I was a black belt, somebody's going to mount and someone's going to be able to hold you there and stick you there. And if you panic and don't know what to do there, feel kind of helpless there, it's a very frustrating and demoralizing situation. So because positions like side mount, bottom, mount bottom, back mount defense, it's so taboo to land and discouraged to land in these spots because you're losing points. They're scoring if somebody lands in these spots. You work on avoiding it, but at some point, someone's going to get there. And then once you're there, getting out is problematic because you haven't put in the hours that it takes to feel comfort and eventually escape there. So that was something that I realized, was that I had these huge glaring holes in my game as a black belt when I became a black belt, even years after. All of the success that I had in my career, I realized that I had to start filling in some of the holes that I avoided my whole career up until that point. That's why I do the cycle the way I do. I give, chunks of time per cycle to these bad positions just as much as I do the good positions. And when you're working from the good position, you're also working from the bad position, because when we do the offensive defensive drills, so you're gaining so much, you're putting in so much time. That's why I think my guys are so tough to tap. Like, the white belts are tough to tap. Because even the white belts put in so much time in these vulnerable spots that they develop the mindset, because they also understand the central path. They're able to practice the central path from these bad positions for so much time. And that's what people don't realize, is what are you putting your time into? What positions are you putting your time into? What techniques and strategies are you putting your time into? Because time is the limiting factor. From time builds your positional perspective. The longer you spend in a particular position, the more time you spend, the more focus over time, the more paying attention you do over time within these particular perspectives, the more you understand the perspective, the more relaxed and comfortable you become. So when you talk about competition and the way competition rewards rewards the competitor, it does not behoove you. It does not behoove you, but you are not rewarded in being in these bad positions, if that makes sense, right? You're taught to not be in these positions. So that mindset of not being in these positions, how can you be good at a position or good at escaping if you're taught to never be there? And that's where I had the conflict in my mind of, wait a minute, like if we're constantly taught to not let people pass our guard, how are we going to be good at escaping the side mount? If we're constantly taught to not be mounted, how are we going to get good at escaping the mount? If we're constantly taught how to not give up our back, how are you going to get good at escaping the back? And when you wipe away this facade of points and you wipe away this facade of time, and you simply focus on the perspective, offensive or defensively, and you solely focus on what works best, which is the central path, it changes the dynamic of the training completely. So yes,
and it's all
my guys
mindset.
compete. Yes, my guys win, but that is the result of doing what we're doing. It is not the focus of what we're doing. It is the result of the system that I'm teaching. You're gonna win because we just spend more time in these positions. We have a better system of attack, a system of defense. The only thing that hinders us is simply time, because if we did competitions and time was not a factor, or there was more time available, the results are going to be even more dramatic. These competitions are very small segments. Can they beat you in a 6 minute, 7 minute period of time? That is not the way I practice jiu-jitsu, with this short time, high intensity, because short time and high intensity, which is what I learned from wrestling, beats your body up. It's more of a sprint. You're more explosive. You're less technical, because time is encouraging that, or the lack of time. People say 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Oh yeah, that's what I said. That's a lack of time. That's a restriction on time. And that's not the way to be able to train forever, because you need to be able to generate a sustainable pace over long periods of time. That's how you're going to put in the hours. If you train, and this is something I learned from Faraz Zahabi, which I thought was very interesting, because it was counterintuitive to how I taught, how I trained. I used to train as hard as I could for as long as I could, and this wears out your body. Whereas if the way that he says it is, spend more time training, so lower the intensity and go for longer durations, and then you gain more time, you gain more training. Which I thought to myself, it's a very Helio Gracie philosophy, because that's how Helio fought. Helio fought. That's why they didn't do time limits initially, because it's hard to win if the guy's a better athlete, more explosive, heavier, stronger, more athletic. That benefits a guy with less time. The second you take time away, that will fade. That explosiveness, that strength, that speed will fade, and you'll settle into a sustainable pace if you just remove the time. So training with time, I'm not saying we don't have rounds. Yes, we have rounds, but the rounds are just an opportunity for you to feel different body types, to stop, change, get a quick drink of water, get back on the mat, and train with a different opponent and a different body type. It's not about winning or losing over that time. It's simply time to feel a different opponent, a different strategy, a different body type. So it's incredibly important that people that are training, especially early on, they're not really focused on winning every second of every round, which is what I did, but I came from a competitive background. But the average person can't do that, because if they do, they're going to get tired, they're going to get fatigued, they're going to get hurt, they're going to get frustrated, they're going to get discouraged, and then eventually they quit. So I'm trying to look at this as a long-term thing, where we're not trying to do a bunch of hard explosive movements, because those hard explosive movements and that kind of a mindset will result in a higher amount of injuries over a set period of time. And you got to remember, we're trying to give the students as much time within each perspective as possible, because as the longer, the more time you spend in a perspective, the more your consciousness grows within that perspective. This is kind of the mindset of JVOS, right?
That's a bit. That's the more time you stay within a perspective, the more your consciousness develops within that perspective, and it's a simple
The more your
but so
consciousness
important.
grows.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this: that consciousness has a ceiling, which I call a positional threshold. Once you understand each positional threshold from each particular perspective, now you understand the sandbox that you're in, and then you are able to master the strategies within that sandbox. There isn't an infinite level of options. It seems that way when your consciousness is very low. But once you've reached that positional threshold, you start to recognize that now you're looking for anything else beyond that threshold. Is there anything else that somebody can do? You start asking the questions, what new behavior or attack can you give me that I have not yet seen? And if they are able to come up with something new, the threshold increases. Now you know, even though it's the opponent, there are less opponents that behave this particular way, at least you know, okay, this is still possible. But more often than not, each perspective has its threshold. This is what I started to realize. I'm doing presentations, which I'm going to be putting up on my YouTube channel. We've got about over 20 right now, lectures of explaining these kinds of concepts. And positional perspective, I have a little chart that the consciousness, I have little bubbles, and the consciousness kind of grows over time. And then once you've spent a certain amount of time, then you've hit the threshold. Then you start asking, what more is there? And once you realize there is nothing else from a particular perspective, then you start to realize, okay, I only have to worry about A, B, C, and D. There's no more E, F, G, H, I, J, whatever. Because when you start jiu-jitsu, you just feel it's overwhelming. But once you start to realize that each position kind of has a cap of what people can do, your anxiety drops. You start to realize, like, okay, I can be calmer. It's the anxiety of the unpredictability, the unpredictableness of the opponent, which generates this anxiety. Once you realize I've hit the threshold, I know what's possible from this perspective, all of a sudden anxiety drops. And that's a mental, this is why I talk about consciousness, right? Once you're aware and you're conscious of what is possible, everything settles.
That elimination of the unknown is sort of when the unknown is what's scary. I don't know what they're gonna do. I don't know what he's gonna hit me with, and yeah. So I see think different. JVOS think different, and that's the difference. Like the difference within the perspective that I try to take into things, which is directly and like primarily influenced by the JVOS system, by the system that I've been learning from you for the past 10 years, is I know more or less, even with black belts, I'm gonna be comfortable in bad positions with this guy, probably. But like there's a certain comfort that I have in a certain position that there's only a certain amount of things. And like, at the end of the day, when you're trading, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like you tap, or at least you swim, which is one thing that I've learned to do, or I've been trying to do more and more lately. Just tap, for better or worse. I know people have different opinions about that, but being in those positions where you're comfortable, like, and there's only a certain amount of things they can do, and I know that once they get here, I'm probably gonna have to tap because my shoulder sucks, or whatever. But that thinking about things differently. Oh, and that's what I was pointing to. Is like, even, people with vastly more experience or more accolades or more whatever, medals.
Credibility.
Yeah, like, but there, I can feel the difference in how we're thinking about things. And that's where I draw my strength from, is like, or at least I get a lot of confidence from the fact that I at least feel like I have more experience in these certain positions that I can get to, that I know I can get to. And then once I'm in that position, you might have 10 years on me in experience, but I bet I have 10 years on you in this position. And
Correct.
and I have so much confidence just thinking that. Now, it might not even be true, but if I'm thinking that, then I at least, it sort of, it gives me that opportunity to be comfortable in this struggle. And that's,
It
one of
doesn't,
the
it
litanies. Yeah.
doesn't, it doesn't matter the level of the opponent. They're limited by the configuration. They're limited by their behavior is limited by the configuration they're in. Doesn't matter who it is. There is a threshold from each configuration. There's only what you can do. And when you understand that, the belt becomes invisible, because now we're just a human with 2 arms and 2 legs in a particular configuration. There's only so much you can do. And guys will, blue belts, black belts, doesn't matter. They pass my guard. They might feel tight initially, the black belt, but I know, regardless of the fact, the configuration is the configuration. There is a root problem for them. There are root problems that I'm going to present, and there are certain configurations I want to avoid, and there's certain configurations I'm going to fight to. Certain configurations I fight from, certain configurations I fight to. And if they don't know that, they're just kind of attacking me randomly, they're going to get lost. They're going to get frustrated, because they might be in a configuration where they're not going to win, or they can't win, or it's incredibly difficult to win, and they're going 100%, not
And they don't even
knowing
know
that.
it. Yep.
They
That's
don't
that's
know
the
it.
thing. That's
That's
the
what I'm saying.
thing.
They don't
Yeah.
realize that they're not going to win. You pass my guard, you try to grab my neck, and it's just very hard to grab my neck. Well, that's by design. And if you don't know that, you're just going to burn yourself out. And eventually what happens is, when people don't know that, and they try to grab my neck, for example, and I'm not allowing it, ultimately they acceptance. And when they accept, that is my green light to advance and adjust, right?
Yeah.
So that is the difference. The reason I say think differently is because there's no randomness to the attack. There's no randomness to the defense. This is a scientifically proven way to do it, because I have put in the tens of thousands of hours to discover these situations.
And
if you haven't put tens of thousands of hours, you're going to fail, or you're going to fail a lot more than you succeed. I'll do at least that. When you understand the root problems of configurations and of positions, of perspectives, as I like to call them, when you understand the root problems and the limitations and the advantages, it's simple. Moves become invisible, because it's not moves that are going to save you. It's the understanding of what the root problems are. That is why JVOS makes you think different. That's why my system makes you think differently, because forget about moves. I do it with the kids. Kids, it's hard to teach kids moves. If you sit them there and go, okay, this is 3, 4, 5 steps, here's how you do it. Tough for them to do it. But what I tell the kids is, all you got to do, I don't care how you do it, but all you got to do is X. They will figure out a way to do X, because X is the problem. It's not how you do X. I don't care how you do X. Now, if they fail, I will say, try it doing it this way first. And then they do it. And if you try to do it this way and the guy does this, you do that. So now I am the one that's starting the timeline. I'm the one that's generating the timeline because of how I'm behaving. the opponent has to counter in a particular way. Because if they don't, I'm going to get out. The central path is such a threat. It is so real. It works so well that they have to respect it and they have to counter a particular way. Because if they don't, I get out. Or if they don't, I tap.
Yeah,
that's why I'm so hyped on this system. And that's why my students advance so quickly, because it's by design. I designed it that way. I don't want the students to suck forever. I want them to suck as little as possible. I want them to be lost as little as possible. So when you go through a whole cycle, when you understand the cycle, all of a sudden, the second time you see the same position, oh yeah, I remember that. And then you're building the skill within the position to fight a particular way. That is the trick.
And I encourage people, if this is interesting to you, to visit the JV Jiu-Jitsu Vimeo channel to check out the JVOS series. You can buy it in chunks. You can buy the entire series outright and have it. It is indispensable. The mindset, the concepts, the thinking, let alone like the terminology and the paths within the master plan, the OS, how to think about things, creating comfort in bad positions. It is absolutely invaluable. It is something when I talk about and think about the difference between instruction that I've gotten elsewhere and in your system, it is first and foremost the way you think about things, the way that you approach things before moves and before positions and before strategies. It's how you're thinking about things, and that really has been the difference for me, and I know for so many others. So I'm very, very excited that the JVOS is available for people, and I'm excited to dive even deeper into it. At JV Jiu-Jitsu on Instagram, at the real Javier Vasquez on Instagram. He is at Javier Showtime on Twitter. Give him a follow. JV Jiu-Jitsu on YouTube. Subscribe. Videos will be coming out regularly.
We'll be coming out soon.
Often.
We'll be coming out soon. I'm going to start dripping out the videos on YouTube. I want YouTube to be a very big platform. I've got a big queue of videos that are lectures to start with. I want to add this podcast to the channel as well as technical instructions and little tips and tricks that I do to help people, solve problems. I want to be very interactive with the audience. I want questions from the audience, and then we'll make videos answering the questions. I want this to be a very interactive experience. We're going to be releasing here, I'm sure. We'll make an announcement, a podcast, and an announcement of when the videos are going to be going live, when we're going to be trickling these out, and it's exciting. It's a very big time for me. This has been, since 12 years in the making. I've been working on this project. I've been getting it's very thought out. My entire system is incredibly thought out, like nothing anybody else is putting out there. My goal is simple. This is my legacy. This is my second lease on life, based on things that have happened, with my health over the past several years. And I definitely believe God has put me here to share this message. Just like the Bible says, when you start changing the way you think of things, your whole life changes. These are called paradigm shifts. I am here to shift the paradigm of the average jiu-jitsu practitioner. And the goal of the master plan is simple. The goal of my system is simple. Don't get hit. And the goal of the master plan is very simple. Change jiu-jitsu forever. That is my legacy, and that is what I'm striving to achieve.
It's a beautiful thing. I'm excited to keep watching it unfold. Javi, thank you very much. We'll talk very soon.
All right, guys. See you soon.